Well, folks, good evening to you. It's nice to have you here. Nice to be here with you. A special welcome to any visitors and to you guys who are watching online from all over. We're glad to have you join us here tonight. My name is Mundi, and I'm one of the elders at Christchurch Cascades. Why a talk on Christians and evolution? Well, it's because in our series, preaching series at the moment, we've been working through the book of Genesis, and we've looked at Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, and I guess the elephant in the room there is, well, what about evolution? I think since I was at school, and for guys coming up into varsity now, this is a very, very big question that they have to wrestle with. And so we thought it would be good just to invite someone who's thought about this a lot, studied it a lot, to come and chat to us. And that's why Dr. Reitze Rodseth is here. It's good to have you, Reitze. Thanks for always making time for these things. It's lekker to have you. And I won't stay up here too long. I just want to inform you that the way this evening is going to work is I'm going to pray to get us going. Reitze will come up. If you have questions that you want to ask Reitze afterwards, you guys who are here, there's pens and papers on the table. If you can ask those, and after he's finished, we'll just take 2 minutes. I'll collect them. And then if you're watching online, there'll be a number on the screen. You can send any questions to that number, and we'll collate the paper questions and any phone questions, and we'll get them to Reitze, and he'll answer a few of those. We were expecting load shedding. We think it's unlikely to happen tonight, but if it does, especially for you guys watching, just give us a couple of minutes to sort out the generator and the connection, and we'll be right back up again. Probably take about 5 minutes, so enough for you to go make some more popcorn and come back. Right, let me pray, and then I'll just hand straight over to Reitze. Father, thank you that you have made a creation that is ordered, that we can explore and research, and that you have given us, I guess, the tools, the minds, the intellect to do that. It's part of us exercising our image bearing. And in this topic, we want to think deeply and carefully about what your word says, what your world says, and how we can respond and think about the different challenges to our faith, to the Bible story. So I pray that you be with Reitze tonight. Help us as we're listening to think clearly, to think carefully, and would you speak truth to us even this evening? In Jesus' name, amen. Reitze, thank you very much. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. You guys can hear me? Great. Thanks for this opportunity to come and speak to you guys. I've just come out of COVID ICU after like 9 weeks of dealing with it. I should get a T-shirt. It says COVID ICU survivor. I wasn't a patient. I was one of the doctors working in it. So thank you for this opportunity to come and speak to you on the issue of evolution. So we're going to get our slides up there. There we go. So I studied medicine at the University of Pretoria, and I consider myself a little bit of academic. I did anesthesia. I then subspecialized in critical care. I worked at Grace Hospital, and then I'm now currently in private practice, still involved a little bit in some of the research stuff. This is commonly the last image that you see of me as an anesthetist. Just relax, ma'am, it'll be over soon. The other image is, this is what we actually do. We kick back, play some Sudoku. My research background, I take my studies and my research quite seriously. It's something that's a part of who I am, and I find it absolutely fascinating exploring all of the beauty of the creation, all the stuff in medicine. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a background so that you understand where I'm coming from and the struggle that I had to try and deal with this concept of evolution, because in many ways, if evolution is true, it contradicts those very first 2 chapters in Genesis. And that's quite a bad way to start the Bible if it's wrong, So I did a master's in anesthesia through UKZN, and I did a master's at McMaster in health research methodology in Canada, and a PhD at UKZN. I've published over 100 papers, about 4,000 citations, and then I've been an NRF, National Research Foundation rated researcher, and I've received 1 or 2 awards for it. Just keep a look at that, because I want to show you a real researcher later on in this talk, to give you a little bit of a concept of the people that are working in this field of evolution. All right, so here we go, evolution and creation. Genesis starts with, in the beginning, God. And the whole focus of this is God creating, God doing, putting in order, structuring animals, plants, light, the whole works. And you read it, and you come away with this image of God is in control, God has done it all, this is how it happened. And then you pick up a biology book in standard 5 or 4, wherever it is, or grade 7, and it contradicts what the Bible says. So you can't run away from this, and if you do try to run away from it, you're going to run into an issue that I had, is after a while those doubts start to surface. And you become a bit of a schizophrenic Christian, where you believe these things, but you live in this world that seems to say these things, and you don't know how to reconcile them. Next slide. So the aim of this talk today is threefold. The first thing is to equip you, right? So I want you to be able to understand this for yourself, to have a few points that you can go and read about. And I would encourage you not to just go, oh, that was a cool talk, or that was a terrible talk, to actually go away and pick one of these little topics and make it your own. Equip yourself so that you can engage, which is going to be the second part of this. How do you actually talk to people about this? And then finally, I want to use this as an opportunity to exalt God in the process. Sometimes you get lost in the details. So we started off with God in the beginning and with prayer, and I want to take you through the details, and it's a bit technical sometimes. But at the end, I want us just to step back and to look at this creation. All right. So I don't believe in evolution any more than I believe in gravity. It's a fact. And you'll see a lot of these very dogmatic statements online. What is evolution? The thing that we're talking about today is not like change in myself. My thoughts on the sharks have evolved over time. They've just become a better team, or a lesser team. Evolution and I'm also not speaking about what some people call microevolution, which is what we see in the ICU, bacteria that exist becoming resistant to other antibiotics. What I'm talking about is this grand concept of evolution that explains everything that we see, all the biological life on Earth. That there was nothing except all of these chemicals, and then from the chemicals all got together, and they made biological proteins and stuff, which became cells, and through the filter of natural selection, mutation, we ended up with animals and humans. All right. The nice way to say it is from the goo to the zoo to you. All right, so from salt to proteins and cells to you. That's the claim that evolution is making. There are three problems with this claim. And one of the concerns that I have about the way that evolution is taught is that it is taught in the schools as this is the answer and we know what the answer is. And I'm going to show you some of the modern, I think, cutting-edge arguments against evolution. And that it just doesn't make sense when you really, really start studying it. So again, I would urge you not to shy away from studying evolution. In fact, I think we should teach it more, really get stuck into it. So there's three issues, main big problems with evolution. There are abiogenesis, molecular genes, and information in the cell. All right. I think abiogenesis is maybe the biggest word of the day. A means none, and biological, and genesis, the beginning. So the beginning of biological life from nothing, from cells and stuff like that. Not cells, from sodium, chloride, potassium, from ions, from all the non-organic matter that we have in this world. The sun shining on it, on the water, in a little murky pool somewhere, and out popped the first cell. That's the concept. So how do you get life from non-life? How do you get a living thing from silicon and carbon and plastic? How do you get life? How do you get oil to become something that lives, that moves? If you let me know, we can be rich. We go from all of those little elements to this, not just like one dog, like an entity of, like a multitude of beings, of animals, of plants, of insects, about 400,000 subspecies of beetle. It's crazy. That cartoon dog doesn't count. Next one. what is the evidence for abiogenesis? Why would you believe that something living can come from that which is dead, which has no life in it? When you summarize the evidence for abiogenesis, there is none. There is no experiment that demonstrates anywhere that you can get life from non-life, that you can get biological entities, living biological entities from just ions. You will have heard in the background about Miller-Urey experiment and stuff, and that's so like 20th century. This is Professor James Tour, and now I want to introduce you to a real researcher, okay? I've published 100 papers, he's published 700. I don't have any patents. My H-index is about 20, his is 150. It's a logarithmic thing. So he's not just better than me by 5 times, but it's about close on 50 times. My total citations is 4,000. He's 107,000. He's in the top 0.004% of the 7 million scientists who've published 5 or more papers. This guy is hot. This guy knows his stuff. So why is he so famous? He makes motor vehicles. He makes cars and buckies and trucks at a nanoscale. So these things are made, they move, they can drive them, they can load them with stuff at a molecular level. He has dedicated his entire career to building those little things, and they move. Those little bucky wheels, it's got a loading bay there, it's got a chassis, it's got a rotating axle that actually turns, and he spent his entire life and his entire team works on this type of thing. Next slide. This is his updated version of the car. It's iteration number 30. It's got a stator, which is like a stabilizing thing, and then a rotor, which rotates around and actually pushes the car forward, makes it walk, makes it move. So when light hits it, they've got a photoreceptor in the car that activates a protein that pushes it and makes it move. And there's some pictures of it moving. Incredible, eh? This is at a molecular level. So there's a paper that he's written, and he's a Christian. He's very much against the superficial way in which people gloss over the problems with what they call prebiotic chemistry. How do you go from these chemicals to living life? And he says, here's an example of how it took us, what we had to do to create these little vehicles, right? And we're talking here over a span of 10, 15 years, 20 years as they're working on this. So first they made the vehicle. They designed it, built it with chemicals, all the type of stuff. When they finally had the vehicle, they couldn't dissolve it in any solution. The universal solvent, as you all remember from school, clearly, is water. But when you dissolve these things in water, most of them just, the ions of the water bind to the proteins and the things don't work. There are about 50 different solvents that chemists can use. Not a single one of them worked. They had to scrap the whole model, start again from scratch. They build it, now it moves. They wanted it to move further, because we're talking about, microns. So they had to redesign the chassis because it was too rigid. It couldn't actually move. Then they had to get a motor for it. Some guys had designed a motor somewhere in Switzerland, so they brought the motor in, had to reconfigure it, and think chemistry, making all these things, mixing it, put it into the machine. Didn't work because the motor damaged part of the structure, so they had to change the chassis. Then they had to put another motor on. They had to find little ways to lock it onto the chassis. They had to build different wheels because the motor interfered with some of the ions around the wheels. So then they had to build a new motor because they wanted to actually see this thing move faster. And then when they finally got it to go faster, they found that they were working on a gold plate. They couldn't actually get it to move because the wheel stuck to the gold. So they had to put it on glass. But now they couldn't see it. So they had to add some fluorescent stuff onto it, and so on and so on and so on. 15, 20 years, one of the brightest oaks with an incredible team that you'll ever see. I'm going to just give you a little concept. This is to make one component of that motor, right? This is some of the complexity. So in an oven, dried 3-neck round bottom flask charged with hydrazone 33 and magnesium sulfide was added, dichloromethane. To this suspension was added quickly MnO2, sigma aldrich at 95 degrees Celsius. The reaction flask was immediately immersed and stirred in a cold bath ranging from -15 and. That's one step. One step. If you got water into that at the wrong temperature, you don't cool it fast enough, it doesn't work. After you do this, you get maybe 2 proteins out of all of the proteins that you're looking for. You have to go and isolate them, pull them out, store them in a place. You've got all of your motors stored away, cold, bring them out, reactivate them, bind them together. Half of them don't work, purify, pull it out, and on, and on, and on, and on. That's what I felt like when I read it. He says, designing a nano car is child's play in comparison to the complexity involved in the synthesis of proteins, enzymes, RNA, DNA, and polysaccharides, let alone the assembly into complex functional macroscopic systems. He knows what it takes to build a dinky toy car at the nano level. And he looks at the machinery in our bodies and he goes, you must be joking if you think this stuff came out without somebody actually designing it. This is an engine that drives the tail of bacteria. It sits in the back of the bacteria. It's called a flagellum. And this thing spins around. It's got about 46 proteins in it. It's got a rotor. It's got a stator. It's got a protein pumps. These things spin at about 10,000 revolutions a second, right? There is the dinky little collection that he made, the little dinky car at the top for comparison. He's saying with a crack team of people in perfect conditions, rebuilding and rebuilding and rebuilding and rebuilding and storing and bringing back, that's the best they could come up with. And he looks at this thing and goes, that is beyond our capacity by a mile. Here is a closer focus of it. This is the protein pump that pumps proteins in and out, that drives the motor of this process. And that's happening about 1,000 times a second as it's happening. The engineering and the design in this is off the hook. Next slide. Those who think scientists understand the issues of prebiotic chemistry are wholly misinformed. Nobody understands them. The basis upon which we as scientists are relying is so shaky that we must openly state the situation for what it is. It's a mystery. It cannot be done. It cannot be done by chance. Next one. Here's Harold P. Klein. He writes, the simplest bacterium is so complicated from the point of view of a chemist that it's almost impossible to imagine how it happened. The origin of life appears to be almost a miracle. So many are the conditions which would have had to be satisfied to get it going. That's from Francis Crick, the guy who discovered the structure of DNA. When the guys who know chemistry and organic chemistry look at this, they go, it's a mystery, it's a miracle, I don't know how this happened. Next slide. There is no evidence for abiogenesis. So when somebody trots out the Urey-Miller experiment, if some of you have ever read about it, it's so old hat, it's totally dated. We don't know, nobody knows, nobody's been able to do it. It seems to be an impossible bridge. So if it didn't start, how can you have evolution? Next slide. The second point is these molecular machines that I'm talking about. This is a mousetrap. I've got some mice currently at our home. We're having troubles. My wife made me buy a humane trap, one of those things that catches it. It's not working. For a mousetrap to work, you need 5 components. You need a base to hold it stable. Then you need a spring that's going to smash down the hammer onto the head of the mouse. You need a holding bar that can hold it in tension, and then you need a catch. That's where you put the cheese so that when they pull on the cheese, it comes down and it hits the mouse. If you don't have one of these, any one of them, the mousetrap doesn't work. It is a useless piece of metal and wood. They must all be there at the same time in the right way for it to work. You understand that? They're an integrated whole. They're useless without all of the parts there. Those are 5 parts that must function together. So Darwin said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not have possibly been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Evolution says that changes occur by small increments. So I develop a light-sensitive spot, which develops into an eye. If we look at the mousetrap, I'm saying that you can't evolve a mousetrap because you can have a base and a catch and a spring, but nothing's going to happen that doesn't work. It can't catch mice until you've got the hammer. You need to have all of the parts together, all right? It's like a car. If you take out one spark plug, it doesn't work. Next slide. Here is an integrated, fully functioning 46-protein flagellum motor. If you take away a single one of these proteins, it doesn't work. How does an integrated structure like this evolve over time? It either works with everything or it doesn't have anything. Do you understand? Darwin didn't know about molecular machines. I'm going to be putting his car up at the top there a lot. And let me just say, this guy is smarter and better qualified, and like, he is amazing. You know, I'm not trying to mock him at all. I just want to give you an example of what the best we can do versus what our nature, what the biology around us is. Next slide. This is the processing of DNA replicating itself. DNA is a double strand. So that blue thing over there rips the two DNA strands apart, and you code on both sides of the DNA. The one string of the DNA is written in the sense, it goes from like A, B, C, D, E, and that one's easy to copy. But the other one is written in reverse. It goes from Z up, and it needs to be thrown out as a loop, encoded and coded back to create proteins. That looks like a processing plant. Then that DNA is then wrapped around ribosomes, which protect the DNA so that you can store it while you're busy, while it's packed away, while it's not functioning. All of that is happening in every single cell, and if it doesn't function all at one go, it doesn't function. This is happening in billions and billions of your cells, every moment, every second. It's a massive deal. They are machines that if you remove a protein, you change the conformation, they don't work. We've seen a lot of COVID patients pass away. When the pH in their blood hits a certain level, the proteins stop working and the patient dies. It's like it just happens. But somehow, we are to believe that over time, these things, by slight successive changes, came and became a functioning DNA protein. And I want to remind you again of all of the steps that they had to go through to build that little car. They could do this, stop, scrap the whole thing, guys, let's go back. Because they had a target in mind, they knew what they wanted to build. But evolution is supposed to be a blind process. So how does it know that I want to build a DNA, RNA replicator? It doesn't. It's supposed to have no target. It doesn't know how to do it. Darwin says if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. And I think, I'm pretty convinced, that the molecular machinery that we see in the cells proves Darwin wrong. And that's a good scientific principle to do. Put something that can demonstrate that my work is false, it's falsifiable, it's a good principle. And I think his theory, by his own words, has been proven false. The third point is the information in our cells. Our cells are coded with DNA, and DNA has got these instructions that allows the building and replication of proteins. From this journal, they write that there is general agreement that the key essence of life, what is something that is alive, is information. Which is very interesting from a Christian perspective, because God creates by speaking and injecting information into a system. But like philosophers, these guys look at it and they're saying, look, what is to be alive? There is something in it. There's an instruction, a living component, and information is a key component of this. And it's encoded in our DNA. And everybody these days is an expert on DNA and RNA and viruses. So this is very familiar territory to you. Richard Dawkins, who's a a very staunch, aggressive atheist, writes in his book, The River Out of Eden, the machine code of the genes is uncannily computer-like. Apart from differences in jargon, the page of a molecular biology journal might be interchanged with those of a computer engineering journal. Who writes computer code? Humans, with intelligence. And when he looks, who's a biologist, looks at RNA and DNA, he sees code that's been written by, well, he thinks evolution. So the question is, can natural processes create new information? How do we get new information? What is information? This sign says thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's in English. It's simple. It conveys a message. You understand it. I've transmitted information to you. What are random processes that are supposed to generate information? And the classic one is the monkey on the typewriter. If you have enough monkeys hammering away at a typewriter for long enough, you will get Hamlet's sonnet. Have you heard that? Yeah, just by pure chance. The interesting thing is that you don't get Hamlet's sonnet. They've done this before. So they did a little experiment, take a cage full of monkeys, put a computer into it. So the monkeys jump up and down on it, they poo on it, they wee on it, they throw food at it, they regret it, some of them bash away at it, and after about a month or two, they pull all the data off and they have a look at it. There's not a single word on that page, because to have a word, you need to have a space, and then a letters, and then a space. So the only source that we know that creates information that can be understood is intelligence. We humans, intelligence is the only source of information. Next slide. This is a really interesting article. It says, it's titled The Cause of the Cambrian Explosion, Terrestrial or Cosmic. This guy writes, I've paraphrased it just to make it easier to understand, but you can read it, the same concepts there. It says, transforming specifically chosen amino acids and proteins into a primitive living cell capable of further evolution appears to require overcoming an information hurdle of supra-astronomical proportions. That motor that drives the flagellum is there in the background. There's DNA that codes for it. And the DNA uses just-in-time engineering principles to make it. They don't make the tail before the stabilizing proteins are made. And once the stabilizing proteins are made, it makes the motor and the state and the rotor, and then it builds the tail. And all of that information is encoded beforehand. It's stuck in that DNA and in that RNA. He looks at this and he says, whoa, this is astronomical. The information, where does the information come from? He says an event that could not have happened within the time frame of the earth, except, we believe, as a miracle. You're not supposed to use that word in scientific journals, but I've seen it 3 or 4 times now in this presentation. Miracle, mystery, we don't know. All laboratory experiments attempting to simulate such event have so far led to dismal failure. And he goes on to propose that the information that is in our DNA comes from an extraterrestrial, non-Earth cosmic source. That some entity, something has planted Earth, life here on Earth. Francis Crick also believed that, having looked at it. And he believed in a concept called panspermia, that this information molecule, some floated off to Earth, and then there was a cell that started dividing, and that's where it came from. Because they all recognized the impossibility of life originating from chemicals here on Earth. So Mr. Johnson believes that it's a fact. I wish to disagree with him. And I wish to disagree with him on the evidence of abiogenesis. There is no evidence. It can't be a fact if you can't show me it. Like, not even close to it. It's not if the molecular machines take Darwin at his test and show him to be wrong. And it's a fact when there's information in our cells that nobody can understand where it came from. So it brings the one big question: why? Why is evolution as the answer in every textbook and in every university? And it comes down to this one principle. Richard Lewontin, philosopher, scientist, wrote, "We have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism." Materialism is a philosophical approach or a methodological research approach that says we will not, the only thing that can cause the stuff that we see in front of us is material, is the world that we are in, that we can see and that we can measure. If we can't see it, if we can't measure it, you can't point to it as a reason. We cannot allow a divine foot in the door. He gives away a little bit of the game. But I believe that when you conduct science, you need to put all the cards on the table and you follow the evidence where it leads. And some of these guys have moved on to saying there's a cosmic origin for life. Because when they look at the evidence, it pushes them away from the earth and beyond our time frames. They just don't have an answer for it. But if you've decided that you will not look outside the earth before you start doing your research, then you can't look at it. Then evolution is the only game that you can, the only answer that you can point to. So if you see a dead body there and you've decided it cannot be Craig, and even if Craig did it, you have to go and find the next best looking individual. So they have a prior commitment to it, and that is why evolution is taught as the answer. All right, first part, done. Engaging around this issue. How do you talk about it? Well, we've done the first step. Unfortunately, you always have to do a bit of work. And again, you've come out in the middle of a COVID pandemic to come and sit over here. That's a bit of work. But take one of these concepts, go home, read about it a little bit, make it your own. Get the work. But now you want to use that and you want to engage with people around you. The first principle here, and the internet is incredibly short of this, is gentleness and respect. And there are few things as heated and just plain horrible as some of the debates and arguments and just anger that spills out around this issue of evolution and the age of the earth and Genesis online. But as followers of Jesus, we are called to reflect his character. And with gentleness and respect, in your heart set apart Christ as Lord, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give a reason for the hope that you have. This is part of the preparation. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. When you go into these conversations, take a deep breath. Realize that you are representing Christ, Jesus, as you speak, and act as his ambassador as you do that. The most useful way that I've found of thinking about this and talking about it is to take the other person's viewpoint of where life started seriously and go and learn about it and understand it and understand where they're coming from. There are only roughly four models. How did life come about? Either naturalism, there is no God, atheism, and everything came from evolution. Abiogenesis must be true. Evolution led to everything and all the complexity in the world. The second approach is God-directed evolution. So God started the process. God creates, touches here, sets the ball rolling, and we see the world evolve, animals evolve in front of us. Or you believe in creation, that God created it, and then there you've got two categories, people who believe that the earth is young and people that believe that we live in an old earth. All right. So those are the four models. All of them have got problems that you need to understand, that you can use to engage with people, that you need to think about for yourself before you start making really strong dogmatic statements. If you believe that evolution, naturalism is the model that explains it all, you have to deal with the science that I've presented to you, which I think is quite an insurmountable problem. If you believe in theistic evolution, again think that the science is a little bit against you, but it also creates quite significant theological problems. If you're a young earther, again, the physics, not carbon dating, but the physics of the age of the earth are very much against you. And if you're an old earther, you've got big problems with how you read Genesis. There's no free lunch. We are called to become mature Christians. I want to look often we get this issue, and this is a little bit of an in-house discussion among Christians. You know, if you're not a Christian, you need to deal with the issue of Jesus Christ. If you are a Christian, then we talk about, what's the age of the earth? How do you read Genesis? Again, there are few things that get people as angry and as un-Christian as this issue. You just jump on the internet and you can see some of it. I believe in an old earth, and the reason I do is based on the physics, mainly driven by the speed of light. I think the speed of light sets the framework by which we understand the age of the earth. A lot of people that believe I've got a problem in that, how do I read Genesis? If you read Genesis, it's pretty clear that they're talking about days. They use days in slightly different ways, but he's talking about a 24 or a 12-hour period. It's talking about the day. And a lot of people will say that if I don't accept the way that Genesis, the natural reading of Genesis, then I'm putting man's word, which is physics and science, above God's word. But I believe that I can read the Genesis account honestly with integrity and not have to accept the fact that it is a 7-day period. It's pretty clear that the book of Genesis is not a scientific textbook. It's about God. In the beginning, God. God created, God speaks, God puts in place. The whole focus is about God, His creation, us in that creation, the relationship of us to His creation. It is not a scientific textbook. You do need to take it seriously. But I think that you can read it with integrity and still come away and saying that God is not giving us, this is how it happened chronologically. What He is giving us is that He is the creator, He did it like this, He ordered it in a specific way. Why do I think I can do that? Well, we do that a lot. Here's a passage out of Joshua. The sun stood still and the moon stayed until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Joshua? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven and hastened not to go down about a whole day. The book of Joshua says that the sun stood still. You got it? You agree? If you read this literally like it is there, you need to believe that the sun is moving. Right? That the earth is stationary. You need to believe in a geocentric model of the universe. And if you don't believe me, this is John Calvin, and he writes there about people, the monstrous people who are saying that the earth moves. And they're in clear defiance of what the Bible teaches us. Next passage. Here's Martin Luther saying exactly the same. The Bible clearly shows us in Joshua that the sun moves. So that is the way it is. But the Bible is written not as a scientific textbook. I teach Josh every morning, my son is 5. The sun is coming up. When I say the sun is coming up and setting, do I believe that the sun is moving? No. That's how we talk, because when we write as a human, we write from our perspective of how we see it. And I always add as a little parenthesis, because I'm that type of parent. Actually, it's the earth rotating, Josh. Which says a lot about us, our family. I believe in heliocentrism, but I read the book of Joshua because it's taken from the perspective of the person looking at that thing. That's how we experience life. That's how it's written. Geocentrism, I don't think anybody here believes in it. When we talk among ourselves as Christians, and this is my plea when you get involved in this, or when you want to debate me, or you're getting really worked up, there are commonalities that we need to hold on to and talk among ourselves with gentleness and respect. Everything originated supernaturally from God. God is the creator. There was an incremental period of time. He could have created everything in one go, but He didn't. He used 7 days or billions of years. It happens over time. God is actively involved in creation. He is the creator. He's fashioning it. He's sustaining it. He's making it happen. The universe is created as a home for mankind. And it's quite popular these days to look on humanity as some type of parasite here on earth. We're destroying everything and we shouldn't really be existing. But that is not true. That's not a reflection of who God has created us to be. He's created humans in His image. And God's relationship to His creation is accurately described in the Bible. That is the aim of Genesis. It's overarching aim. And then learn your models, decide what are the weaknesses, pick a model, understand how to defend it and talk about it, and how to critique respectfully and gently somebody else's model. And teach your kids one. Become mature and wise in handling the Scripture and the world around you so that you can present yourself to God as a workman who's educated, who knows what he's doing, who's thoughtful with God's word. Right. Okay, take a deep breath. Last stretch. Okay, here we go. When you look at the creation, it leads to awe and it leads to worship. It exalts God. This is a breakdown of the parasympathetic nervous system that we study in medical school. Sympathetic makes your heart go faster. Parasympathetic makes it go slower. It's just a rough sketch of all the nerves that run in the body. In every picture, I'm going to put that little motor up there at the top, just as a rough guide for you to understand the complexity of what we're dealing with, the engineering that we're dealing with. This is the process by which the kidneys clean urine, or generate urine, clean your blood. There are multiple loops, multiple feedback chains where you're driving electrolytes in and electrolytes out to try and balance your water load so that you don't dehydrate and you maintain all of your sodium. This is the Krebs cycle there at the bottom, which creates electrons, and the electrons get kicked up into that top thing over there, which is an electron transport chain. And as the electron bounces across there, it generates energy that keeps the polarity and the stability across your cells, keeps them alive. When that stops, you die. Next slide. This is a general outline of a whole cell, how the DNA works, where all of the energy substrates start coming into the cell. This is a very interesting one, particularly now in COVID, is what happens when a microbe there at the top comes into your body. It switches on a system called the complement system, which is the one in the middle there, which then activates a whole clotting process in your body because it thinks, well, maybe there's some bacteria in here, we need to stop it, and switches on your inflammatory process. And this is driving a lot of the blood clots that we're seeing in COVID. This is a nightmare for medical students. This is the clotting pathway, because when you start to clot, you better be sure that you need to clot. And you need to clot fast, because if you're bleeding from a gunshot or something like that, you need to clot. But you need to stop clotting at some stage, otherwise you all go. So you need a feedback system that controls all of these things. So I've learned this pathway every single exam, and I've forgotten it straight after for every single exam. So this is a breakdown of all of the different amino acids, glucose pathways, fat metabolism pathways that are happening on a chemical level inside those cells with all of those billions of little proteins that are running simultaneously in your body. This is a T1 cellular immune response in your body. This is what happens when, for the first time, a COVID virus comes in and switches on your entire inflammatory response. And this is what is killing people as they get overwhelmed by the numbers of thousands and hundreds of different proteins and markers and inflammatory markers that switch on and switch off and just to fight this infection. And luckily, we can get a vaccine, which is the T2 pathway, which generates antibodies. And these two pathways synthesize with one another and feedback and create memory so that if you've seen the COVID virus at the age of 12, when you're 60 one day, your body's going to remember it because it's been stored in an information retrieval system in your cells. This is a more detailed technical breakdown of the glycolytic pathway. Zoom out a little bit. It's there on the left-hand side as we start to see how that integrates with the processes that make red blood cells, the hemes. And I'm going to come out a little bit further to give you a little bit more of a concept to this page over here. One more. This is just the biochemistry. There in the top is Professor Tour's little machine. This is integrated, happening constantly in every cell in your body on top of the replication of all that protein. Who designed something like this? And then he designed stuff like this. and then makes crazy animals like this. This is an artist. Sun and the moon, stars, nebulas, the sun. And this is why the book of Psalms says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the skies proclaim the work of his hands. And this is why we all know that there is a God. There's no getting away from it. It's also why we're all guilty before him, because we choose to stand in rebellion against him. Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you. We'll take questions.
Guys, as we wait for cell phone questions to come in, if you want to write any down, you can. It'll be easier to write down rather than shout, then we don't have to repeat stuff the whole time for those who are online. As you're thinking about your questions, just Reitze, thanks. Two things you said there. Well, one thing you said there at the end as we looked at this is an artist. And as I was listening to you and looking at those pictures, I was just struck by that verse in one of my favorite Psalms, which I read to parents with newborn babies. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. And it gives a whole new definition to that. I imagine the Lord sitting there, like pulling his hair out as he draws these things and stuff. It's brilliant. He is an artist. He's made things well. Thank you. That was really helpful and encouraging. I'm going to collect questions and then Edge. Have you got any? None. Cool. Well, maybe one or two. Cool. Okay. You want to have a look at them first? Or should
No,
I just
go for
read
it.
them and go? Okay.
I don't know the lotto numbers.
Okay. If all the evidence that you presented that shows that abiogenesis, is that right, cool, is ridiculous, why have so many intelligent other scientists not accepted this evidence and still believe in evolution?
So there's a few things around it. The first principle that I'm going to say is the point that I made in the talk is the why. Why won't they accept this? In the scientific community, there's this commitment to naturalism. If I'm trying to figure out why COVID is killing people and how I can change it, I'm not allowed, and I shouldn't be looking for some supernatural reason for it. I need to study the virus, see what it does, find the material, push it in, go for it. That's a materialistic, naturalistic approach, a methodology that we follow, and it's an appropriate thing. I can't be like some of the Greek philosophers pointing at humors and spirits moving this stuff. But when I start to study it, and it's showing, as we see in evolutionary theory, that there isn't an answer here, that the answer is at a different level, at something different, normally you would want to go and look at that. You want to go and explore that as a reason, but you're not allowed to do it. And if you do it, there's pretty big penalties for a lot of people if you do. So a lot of guys have been pushed out of universities, have been ostracized, have been attacked, have lost fellowships because they've taken they've taken a stance against evolution, which is seen as rebelling against the whole standard narrative. Then the second thing is people often don't want there to be a God. So it's, if I don't want there to be a God, then let me do my research. And then the third thing is a lot of the evolutionary theory has absolutely no impact on the work we're doing. Evolution affects medicine zero. Like it is totally irrelevant. On 99% of the biochemistry work that the guys do, like James Tour, he makes cars. It doesn't matter whether evolution is true or not. It's only in the guys that are doing prebiotic chemistry or paleontology or that type of stuff or evolutionary biology where it becomes central to what you're trying to do. And that's your job. You're an evolutionary biologist. You need to be doing evolutionary biology. Otherwise, what are you doing? But when people then start to step back and specialists out of fields like Tour come into the game and say to them, but you're doing this little bit of research, you get one answer, then you cherry pick that, you refine this one protein 1,000 times, you put it into perfect lab conditions, and then you do your research, you're not doing it like you say it happened. And that's his thrust. So there's multiple reasons why people do it. Societal, the research component, individual, things like money, your job.
As an old earther, would you hold that all 6-day periods have an equal time allowance? And if not, does the descriptive language in Genesis change?
Okay, so if you're a short earther or a young earther, you believe that when God said on day 1 there will be day and night, it was one day. He created animals, it was one day. It's a 24-hour period. As I've said, I believe in an old earth, mainly because the physics suggests that the universe is about 14 billion years old, and that our earth is about 7 billion. I always forget if it's 4, I think it's 4 billion in that region. They're old. When I look at life emerging on earth, it happens in waves. So you get very basic cellular organisms, and then almost as out of nowhere, you get an explosion of more complex animals and life forms, and then a second more complex one, a third one on top of that. And to me, it looks as though information is being injected into the system over time. And that's the pattern that seems to fit the best with what I say, with what I see. So I would say that these time frames that Genesis is using are, in our time, are not the same length. So the time for the earth to form and to cool and to become a habitable planet is the majority of the time that it takes, of what the age of the universe is. And then you have emergence of life coming through. But I believe that God is creating, so I believe in a concept called progressive creation, where God is speaking into at different points. That's got some problems theologically. I don't think they're that big. But then all of the models have got some challenges that we need to deal with. So I don't know if that answers it.
Okay. So I'll get to the others' questions. Do you believe in a global flood? And if so, how do you think kangaroos got to Australia?
Yes, they can jump. If you believe in a short earth, you must believe in a global flood. There are big problems in the way that the world looks in terms of the geology and the structure of the world, how all the continents fit together. If you believe that if you believe that the earth is short, you need a global flood to create the rapid changes that look as though they happened over time. So I don't believe in a global flood because I'm an old earther. So I don't believe that is a problem. I believe kangaroos in Australia because they're the only things that would live in Australia. Because God created them there. But that type of question is the type of question that people ask. If you do believe in a young earth, then you need to believe in a global flood. Then all of the animals and all of their complexity had to come out less than 2,000 years ago out of the ark. And then they had to propagate across the entire world and multiply at an incredible rate, and incredible diversity, generate your 400,000 types of beetles, about 20,000 types of dragonflies, all of those plants, those animals, across the entire world, Madagascar, everywhere, and has to do it in about 2,000 years. So old age, short earth theologians have tried to come up with these type of rapid change models, which started to look like evolution at high speed type of thing. So that's one of the reasons why I'm not a short earther.
I guess the one that... Does anyone have any other questions? Oh, here's one other. Sorry. Okay, this was actually going to be mine as well. The theological difficulties with some of it. So, we're looking at Genesis 3 this Sunday, and Adam and Eve's sin and how death enters the world through that. And this quote is, how do you interpret Romans 5:12, which says that death came through Adam? and that the creation was subjected to futility.
So that concept, that statement that death entered through Adam, the question then is what death entered through Adam? So Adam and Eve are walking in the garden, and Adam picks up an apple and eats it, right? So the apple goes into his stomach. In his stomach are microbes. There's E. coli, they're busy living, they're busy multiplying, there's billions of them. They are dying and they're living. That's what they do. When the apple fell off the tree, it was there, and one of them fell on the ground, the worm would have come and eaten it, and it would have been digested and broken down. And so to assume that in the Garden of Eden there was no death, full stop, means that nothing decays and dies and breaks at all. I believe that Romans is talking about us as humans. Death enters our spiritual death. We were maybe meant to be eternal, or, to live for eternity on earth, and then we then also die as a result of that. But we cannot live in an ecosystem where there is no death. Like, it's impossible. A cell on a tree has to die for the next cell to grow, and the leaves need to fall off. Are just frozen there in time? They're not. It doesn't make sense. So I think that the concept that there was this pristine Eden without any change or motion in it, it's not a static little wax figure with all of these animals and stuff. To live, you need to have bacteria in your gut to digest. And there are billions of them, and they're dying and reproducing every second. That's a natural, normal biome. That's just how it works. So I think people misread that. Death enters in Romans, and if you read the whole context of that, it's about us. That's the central component of it. Yes, creation groans under it, because then creation is subsequently cursed, and it is broken, and it is wrong, and that's what we experience on a day-to-day activity, or day-to-day experiences, that things are beautiful, but they are warped. We are able to do things that are noble, but we're also broken. So that's how I reconcile with them.
Whoever asked that question, do you want to engage a bit more? I'll just repeat if that's okay, Pierre.
I don't know if bacteria suffer when they die, but I think your view requires physical suffering prior to Adam's sin. Am I right?
No.
Okay, so the question just is for those of you watching that the view that Reitze is speaking of, does it require physical suffering? Do the bacteria, I guess, is there suffering in the process of death pre-Genesis 3?
I don't think suffering comes into that thing at all. My statement is that part of normal ecological life in Eden has got a cycle of life, and that's which supports Adam and Eve. There's going to be death and decay as the plant withers and dies, and the acorn falls into the ground, and a new one comes up, and we eat the food, and the bacteria digest it in our stomach, and those bacteria die. There's no suffering involved in it at all. If you think that my view is wrong, and you want to say it's wrong because of the theological issues about the entry of death only coming in with the fall, I'm saying that that's inaccurate. I believe it's inaccurate. I believe that Romans is referring to us, humans in particular, when it speaks of death, and particularly the spiritual death. And I think that's also then consistent with our kind of understanding that we are born into new life. We undergo a rebirth into something new because we are spiritually dead. All of that focus is on us. And then when God remakes the world, he doesn't rebirth the world, he destroys it and recreates it. So I think to draw that concept from Romans and then to apply it to all creation in terms of the death narrative, I think is incorrect.
That's helpful because he does contrast Adam with Jesus. So yeah, maybe that's something that you can engage with a bit more. Any other questions that you have? Anything on phone?
Yeah, there's a couple that come through.
Okay.
So one is, what do you tell Josh about Noah's Ark? Not true.
What do you tell Josh about Noah's Ark? Is it not true?
So you teach children at the level that they're at. So we talk a lot about Noah's Ark because it's cool. I mean, it's an amazing thing. The story, the pressure that Noah was under with all of these people and standing up and following God, and it's amazing, and he builds this massive ark. Did Noah build the ark? I think he built an ark. Did a lot of animals come into the ark? Yes. Did every single animal on the face of the earth come into the ark? No. If you take all of the water in the world, and it will fit into the Mediterranean bowl, there's not enough water on the earth to cover the entire earth. So I will teach Joshua a local flood. And when the Bible, the New Testament talks about, and the whole town came and visited Jesus, do you think every single person, including the babies and the old people and the guy, came to Jesus when they came? No. When he says it covered the whole world, it covered the known world, it probably covered the entire Mediterranean basin. And it was a punishment as it said. But I don't think it's a global flood, because the whole thing turns on this concept of, and it covered the entire world. What do you mean when you cover the entire world? Is this a technical term, every single mountain across the entire globe was covered? Or is it everybody in the town came to see Jesus, the known world, all of the people there were punished by the flood? And I believe that it's the second one. So we talk about it. But I will then, when he's about 12, 13, start talking about these type of issues. So that when he's 16 and 17 and he starts to run into the guys who start saying, well, how did the kangaroos get to Australia? I'm so clever. He's like, but I don't believe that. I don't think that makes sense. And this is why I want to encourage you to engage it for yourself, but also to engage with your family and particularly your children so that they are prepared of it. But if you believe I'm wrong and you want to go with the earth creation, then you need to be able to make an argument for it that's reasonable and coherent. And I think there are some. I don't agree with it always. And I've got some really, really good friends who are brilliant scholars, who are really, really great guys, and they feel that they must believe it because that's what Genesis says. And I'm happy with that. If you feel that's the way you want to go, then fine. But just think it through carefully for yourself and don't sidestep it.
How does one reconcile an old earth understanding with Adam to Christ, genealogies in the Gospels, which seem to suggest a time frame of 6,000 years?
Can you repeat that? I've lost it.
When you look at the genealogies in the Gospels, in Matthew and in Luke, I think, they provide a breakdown of names that go from Adam all the way through to Jesus. And when you add up those lifespans of all of those people, it's about 10,000, 6,000 years, somewhere there. So if I believe in the old earth creation, how do I tie those two together? The first thing to say is, I didn't say that Jesus and those guys, Adam and Eve, were 6,000 years ago, or like 1 billion years ago. I'm saying that the earth is, 4 billion years ago. As to when Adam came, or God created Adam, and the time frame from then, I'm thinking that the time frame there is pretty solid. I don't know if it's exactly 4,000, 6,000, from Adam, yeah. So I could potentially, I'm happy to look at ancient human history as being fairly accurate. I mean, there's issues and sometimes things there, but I think, once you start recording history in Genesis, from after Genesis 2-3, then you start to get history, ancient history, and I don't have an issue with that. The second thing is to build your arguments on the genealogies presented in Matthew and Luke is pretty tenuous water to go onto, because they are, again, not scientific genealogies. They're written in different ways for different audiences. Matthew's genealogy differs dramatically from the one in Luke, because Matthew is writing to the Hebrews, and he wants to emphasize Jesus as the Messiah from the Jewish line. And if you follow his name through, all of these Jewish leaders come through, and David is very prominent, and it's this royal line that comes through Jesus. But they cut a lot of people out, because that's not trying to follow a little history book. It's trying to make an argument of Jesus' messianic identity. You read Luke, and he's got a totally different picture. Like he's naming different people in a different way. So are they wrong? No. He's writing to a Greek audience. And he's trying to present a different view of who Jesus is, so that the Greeks can identify and appeal to, can understand who he is, where does he come from, what is his background. And it doesn't help for the Greeks to fixate on the fact that he's a Jewish Messiah. They want to know from a different perspective, and that's how Luke writes it. So even there, I think that the genealogies are an argument for the fact that we shouldn't read these texts through a modern-day historical lens. It's not a newspaper that's writing down here. They're writing for a different purpose and in a different way than what we would expect them to do.
Questions are coming in thick and fast now. But just repeating, some people are saying they don't understand the answers because they don't know the questions. Where do viruses come from?
Where do viruses come from? Listen on Sunday afternoon at church. Okay, let's have another one maybe. You can come back to that if you want to.
From a Christian perspective, is global warming real?
Skip that one. Okay. I'm skipping that one because I don't think it's as related to the topic. I might be incorrect. Am I incorrect? No, I don't think it's related to the topic. Do you want to cover where do viruses come from, briefly?
Don't you want to cover seeing you speaking out on
No,
Sunday?
he is.
Oh, he is.
Okay, another one's coming.
Okay.
Why would God have allowed the creation of pathogens that are detrimental to his creation?
Okay, that's the virus question.
Just repeat it for...
So the question is, why does God make stuff, pathogens, bad things? Why is there HIV? Why is there Ebola? Why are there viruses? Why is there malaria? All of those type of things. So there's a few answers to this. And this ties into a bigger question, which is really in-depth thing to look at, which is the question of suffering. Why is there suffering in the world? And before I jump in on the Christian answer, I just want to say this is a question that every belief and every faith system needs to answer. So if you're an atheist, you need to be dealing with the issues of where does suffering come from. Hinduism has an answer for it. Buddhism says it doesn't really exist. It's just an issue of craving and identity. Christianity says that God created a perfect world. What is a perfect world? And let's take it back to the Garden of Eden again. What is this perfect world? We, I think, naively have a concept of it as being something that is absolutely static. Again, like these trees that are not decaying or changing, there's an ecosystem that needs to underpin it. So there needs to be bacteria in your gut to digest your food, right? And if that stuff gets on an open wound in your arm after you fall, you're going to get an infection. So when it's in your gut, it's a helpful bacteria, and when it's in your arm, it's a pathogen. So even in the concept of Eden, if you have a normal ecosystem, you have a normal functioning process. You might not have got sick from it then. But when we move that perfect system into a broken system like we have now, where we live in a world that is created perfect, but has been damaged as a result of the fall, and that's what we believe as Christians, is that the sin against God, the rebellion against God's rule has broken our creation. We all long for that which was perfect, but we know it's not perfect anymore. There are deep things that are wrong in our society, in our system. And part of that is natural disasters and things like viruses and malaria and all of those components of it. Interestingly enough, if you look at malaria exists in a specific band in Africa, predominantly, and then later on, sort of in that zone. If you have cattle moving into that area, a lot of those animals will die off as a result of those infections. It keeps people out of it. And in Africa, we've had very little sort of the standard migration into those areas because the malaria has kept them clean. Because it's difficult to live in those zones. So the malaria, to a degree, has protected certain parts of the natural habitat of those places. So in certain ways, when we invade into a space where we potentially shouldn't be, or you eat a bat, which potentially you shouldn't, and you get corona, but you laugh, but that's the issue that's happening, is that there's a breakdown in the normal order and function, and a virus that exists to control a population here, or a bacteria that exists in your gut to make you be able to digest food, when it's in the wrong place, it creates a major breakdown. So you've got a dysfunctional, a suboptimally functioning environment and nature, humanity that is broken, that does stupid things, that deforests, that moves into areas where it shouldn't, that doesn't clean up behind it, creates an environment in which these things can come out. So I don't have exactly all of the answers for it. And again, this ties into the bigger questions of why is there cancer and why is there suffering, which I think is a whole talk on its own. Gee, I hope that made sense. It's a long answer.
Any others? I think we'll do
Okay, so
we'll do one.
there's two more. How do we explain hominids? And then the other one is, you mentioned that you believe in progressive creation. Does that mean God is not done with creation and is he still doing stuff now?
Okay, let me answer the second one.
Can you just repeat it?
So the question is, first part is, what about hominids, Neanderthals? How do they fit in this whole picture? You know, and Lucy and all of those guys before. And then the second question was, in my model of a progressive creation, is God then still creating, and how does that work? Let me answer that side of it first. So it says that on the seventh day God rested. So I believe in progressive creation, but that he stopped creating at a point when he rested. So again, I'm not breaking the Genesis argument or the narrative that's put out here. I'm just spreading it out over time. So when God said, created Adam and Eve, he stopped creating and he entered into the seventh day. Just by the way, are we in the seventh day now, day of rest? Generally, yes. And that day is not just 24 hours, I'm just saying. But I believe that God is sustaining us at the moment. We think of God as having created the world and then stepped back and looked at it from a distance. But if you read Colossians, you see that God, that Jesus Christ, is sustaining, maintaining the creation as it is at the moment. And I actually believe that the reason that we are in existence, that the world exists, is because God himself holds us in existence. It's a little bit like music. If somebody stops playing music, the music disappears. If you stop playing the violin, the music disappears. If God were to stop sustaining us, we would disappear. So I don't believe that he's creating at the moment, but he is sustaining us. Right, so that's it. What about hominids? How do they all fit in this picture? So what you were taught in school and sort of in the general thing is that over time, apes came down from the trees, and then they started walking progressively up like this, and then they started walking upright, and then they started supporting the bulls. If you look at the evidence out of this, you will find that these hominids don't form a chain of sequential chain. So you've got this little picture in your mind of one bigger walks upright, and it becomes us. But if you look at the evidences of it, and you look at the size of these things, it looks like individual little hominids, slightly more advanced than primates, that go off, develop to a point, and stop and die out. And then another group enters in, and it's almost like an apex entity in that ecosystem, exists, die out, exists, die out. And I believe that God is creating progressively in that period of time in those ecosystems. If you look at the details and the genetics that underpin this, they don't run linearly. They don't go one to one to one to one. They're always presented like that superficially, but when you start to read the textbooks, they start talking about the bush. It's not the tree of life, it's the bush of life. Because it doesn't follow linearly. It's messy, and they don't link with one another, and they're different time frames, and they're millions of years apart. So I've got some interesting books on it, if you're interested in, you want to make it your thing. But in my model, they are being created at different points in time, up until the time that mankind is created in Adam and Eve.
So just the last thing maybe as we close, just going back to your one point about engage. So you've just mentioned the hominid thing, and you've spoken again as well about, I guess, the scientists who present findings that are contrary to the big narrative at this moment. And I guess if you're someone who goes and someone says, well, what about, cradle of mankind or whatever, what about that? And you go, well, it's not linear, et cetera, you're going to be, would you be a lone voice in that? Are there a lot of people who do present a more Christian or theistic viewpoint on these things? And how would you engage? You were talking about engaging. How do you, just give us a last sort of word on where to go for engaging. Maybe you've spoken about more information. Just give us a kind of a next step as we go out there to engage.
So the first thing is to have a look at yourself. To some people, this is catnip, like me. I love this type of stuff. And the more Catnip, that makes cats go crazy.
Cats, not you.
Catnip, oh, yeah. It's like sweets, like to my son. If this type of stuff or one of these topics is just on, you really love it, then dive into that topic. If it's just for your interest, learn 2 or 3 steps and refer them to the person that's going to take the step. So what people do is when it gets really technical, some guys come and talk to me. And when it gets really technical to me, I go and talk to guys in the States, in biologists. And so there's chains of expertise in it. And that's how we do all of our life. If your car's broken, you go to the mechanic. If your heart's broken, you go to the psychologist. And the rest of you're broken, you come to me. But so identify, do you really want to, is this something that you're interested in? And don't go after it if you're not interested in it. Learn a little bit. So identify what you want to do. And then you need to do some hard work. So I think you need to decide, I want to study this. I want to learn it. So I've done courses and I'm in a master's degree and I've read books and I've really got stuck into it. And you will realize that there are a lot of people who are really good at this stuff. If you want to look particularly at the evolution creation type debate, I would recommend Reasons to Believe. And that's because of my preference. I don't like the Answers in Genesis guys as much, mainly because of the attitude in which they presented, the incredibly aggressive way that they do it. But there are, it's a group of scientists that follow, that they're open to different arguments. They follow this model approach. They're trying to adjust it based on the science. But find these guys, talk about it. Find people locally that you're interested in. So every now and again, get a little group together, you run a little study group on it. There are a lot of people that are interested in this. Somebody actually in the Cradle of Mankind in that research group at Johannesburg is a Christian who uses their research to demonstrate that the evolutionary theory is incorrect. Sue Dakes. It's like she works with those guys and say, look, this is what we actually found, and it doesn't fit into the narrative. Yes, there is opposition because it's the counter-narrative, but that is our life. To stand up and say that that a marriage between a male and a female is a right and a good thing, and to carry your child to term is a good thing and not to abort it, those moral truths are now seen as something that is worthy of hate and punishment. That's the society that you live in. So learn to stand up for what you believe in, because we are called to be the light in the world. So yes, there is opposition, but you're standing on the truth. And as I've said often, if it's not true, don't believe it. Test it. Christianity is true. This stuff is true. Study it. We don't understand all of it, but get stuck into it. So that would be my argument, or my approach.
Thank you. Thanks, Reitze. Let's give him a hand. Say thank you. Thank you. If you guys still want to engage with Reitze, ask him any questions, do that. We'll hang around. Won't kick you out. Thank you so much for joining us online. And again, thanks, Reitze. That was really interesting and helpful. I had one concern in the whole thing, which was when you spoke about something that to do with our bodies that you learned for every exam and then promptly forgot. If all our doctors do that, I'm a little bit concerned. But otherwise, thanks so much. It was great to have you here. I'm going to close in prayer for us, and then, feel free to chat to Reitze. Father, again, it's worth just reflecting on how marvelous your creation is, how intricate and how detailed and how immensely impressive. You have done all things well. And so we thank you for this evening. Thank you for what you have, what we've been able to learn with Reitze's help. And I do pray that you would help those of us who are keen to find out more, to explore these things, to learn, to study your word, to study your world, and to stand on the truth, as Reitze has reminded us. Thank you that you are true. And I do pray that as many of us take these things out and think about them more, you would help us be equipped to be your witnesses, to be the light, and to be able to share the gospel of Jesus Christ to a world that needs him now more than ever. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you. Thanks again, guys.